This Pokemon card recently sold for a $300,000 loss. In case you're curious, the average anime waifu body pillow sells for $35 US, meaning you could have bought over 8,000 anime waifu body pillows with the amount of money one collector lost selling this one Pokemon card. So, that's a random fun fact for you. Am I an anime weeb? Maybe. Am I excited for Season 2 of Rent-A-Girlfriend? Yes. Should you check the anime out? Probably. But, on a more serious note, this card, and particularly this headline, caught a lot of people's attention, and it has set some parts of the Pokemon community ablaze with theory as well as overall panic. $300,000 is a lot of money, but in today's video, I'm going to share with you some of the secrets and some of the lesser known facts about this card that contributed to what many experienced Pokemon fans are calling an inevitability. But first, roll that sweet, sweet intro. Hey Gengar Gang, what is going on? My name is Ryan, this is the Analytic Gengar, and welcome to another video. In today's video, friends, we talk about the PSA 10 Topsun Charizard, which sold at auction recently for a $300,000 loss. Now, to level set with everyone who isn't following this particular card, this is honestly one of the most expensive Pokemon card sales in the history of the hobby. As you can see, this Ludkins Media article outlines the original sale, which was for $492,000. And this was only 3 months ago during what some would call a little secondary bubble that happened with the Pokemon card hobby. Now, a couple of days ago at PWCC, it sold for only $192,000, which is a staggering, and they don't mean to understate that, that is a whopping $300,000 loss. Nearly $1/3 of $1 million has just been lost because of the way that the market is currently timed. Now, a lot of people have unfortunately seen this and, immediately started panicking, and obviously, rightfully so. It's a lot of money to have lost, and given that this was a record-breaking price a couple of months ago, and the sentiment around the headline was very different, many people are now saying that this is equally as bad, because now this is equally as important, but in the opposite capacity. Meaning, there's a concern of the genuine health of the Pokemon hobby and how investable some of this stuff is. Now, in today's video, I figured it would be a good time for us to sit and talk about this card. And I'll go ahead firstly by saying that this was a combination of risk versus reality. That's what this was. When this card sold for $492,000, I didn't necessarily share it on the YouTube page, but I did have it in the back of my head thinking this was a risk, this was a gamble, this was about as big as it gets. Because this is the quote-unquote first Charizard card ever, and this was such an amazing card, and it's the blue-back version of the Japanese Topsun, and that means it's, the original Charizard card. And in the back of my mind, when I heard all of that, the first thing that popped into my mind was, show me the documentation. Show me where it says that, and show me where or why you're not pointing to a website or an official statement or something that gives an authoritative stance on that statement. Because up till now, I've only ever seen people point fingers at one another when that question gets asked. So, if I'm selling to you, you go ahead and say, oh, well, Ryan, the Analytic Gengar, he's the one who said that happened. And then you're going to sell it to someone else, and you're going to sell it to someone else, and sooner or later it'll just be, oh, the seller of this card told me that. And that is exactly why this card gave me a major headache the minute I heard it sold for nearly $500,000, because I realized that there's an inherent amount of risk to this card that there just isn't with cards like first edition base set, gold stars, or even prime cards. Because with those cards, we have a relatively good idea of where they stand in the overall Pokemon TCG hobby. We understand that either these cards are the OGs, that they're incredibly difficult to grade, or some variety of factors means that, hey, they're in short supply and are very rare. Problem with this card is, although it's relatively obscure, we don't necessarily know a lot about it, and given that this card is a niche, it's not part of the Pokemon TCG, but is instead part of a separate company, Topsun, who printed these cards, there's even more confusion layering on, because we're not talking about our TCG, we're talking about a different collectible trading card game, or in this case a trading card in general, and people are just going to conflate the two and make all sorts of wacky decisions. And that's exactly what we saw here. The reality of the situation for this card is there's a lot wrong with this card that up till today no one can definitively and authoritatively take a stance on. A, because no one wants to put their reputation on the line if they're wrong, and B, because documentation around this stuff is incredibly, painfully lacking. And so in today's video, those are the couple of things that I'm going to outline. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. My first reason why this should not come as a surprise to anybody is because this is not first edition base. I'm sorry, but this card and this card are not the same. And just because everyone says that the same Pokemon is on the card is not good enough a reason for this card to have sold for $500,000 nearly. The truth of the matter is that when we think about Pokemon, the first edition base set Charizard is the card that is defined as the Holy Grail for the majority of players. And so just because the same Pokemon is on both of these cards does not mean this card should have sold for that much. I personally believe that the reason why this card sold is because, well, of course, it's a Gem Mint 10, it's Charizard, rumor has it it's the first one. And I think its Charizard was one of the major reasons why it was able to carry such a premium. But obviously, the fact that this isn't the first edition base set holographic means sooner or later the price had to come down. And if you're noticing one thing, I want you to notice the fact that this card sold for a whopping loss. Many other cards are experiencing a retrace in the hobby right now, but this isn't a retrace, this is a straight up crash. And if anyone were to ever say there was a bubble, I believe the bubble exists in situations like this, where people conflated the, rarity or the importance of a Pokemon like Charizard and imposed that artificially onto cards that were less attractive than their original market entrance. In this particular case, they said, hey, this Charizard Topsun is a Charizard, therefore needs to be worth a lot of money. But the truth of the matter is, the only Charizard card that is truly worth that much is going to be the first edition base set Charizard and a couple of other significant Charizards that have been around in, one capacity or another. This card, although legendary, iconic, and perhaps even a original collectible, isn't one of those trading cards. The second item up for debate is the artwork and what it's lacking. So hear me out. There are many great Charizard artworks out there, and one thing that I applaud the Pokemon trading card game for is the variety and diversity of artwork that we frequently get. It's not an understatement to say that some collectors really base collecting decisions based off the artwork. Now, you might look at first edition base set, you might say, okay, it's relatively basic, and I mean, my personal favorite Charizard card has to either be the Gold Star or has to be the Crystal Charizard. But whether you're looking at Arita, Fukata, or anybody in between, the truth of the matter is that we usually have a really cool set of artworks to pick from when we love a Pokemon card. The problem with this card, in my opinion, is that when we're looking at the card, there's not really much here to appreciate. The one issue that I have with this card is that it looks like the scene from the opening of the English anime. And that's always confused me, because when I first saw this card, I thought they ripped the artwork from the TV show, but then I realized that this was a stock art for the Pokemon card from way back in the day. So, unfortunately, we ended up in a situation where, although this is iconic because it's one of the original depictions of Charizard, the simple truth of the matter is it doesn't have that artwork or the holographic pattern that many of the higher performing Charizards have. Again, am I saying that this was the main reason that, it only sold for $200,000? No, $200,000 is still a lot of money. But you also need to realize this card is relatively old, relatively vintage, is in excellent condition to have gotten a PSA 10 in the 5 numbered certs, and in the grand scheme of things is still an amazing card. The problem is that it won't sell at the same velocity, nor will it sell at the same levels of interest as, you know, your commonplace gold stars, crystals, and vintage WotC era holos will. And that's just because, you know, the artwork's not really there. Next up is the idea that maybe this card isn't as original and isn't as unique as you think. So one of the things that I recently found out, and this is through a combination of hearing things from other people's videos, credit to SM Pratt, who did some pretty impressive research on the topic to begin with, but also then independently confirming, is that Topsun wasn't created as a trademark until 1997. So to say that this card is a 1995 Japanese Topsun doesn't make sense, because they wouldn't have been able to use the name until after their copyright and trademark were in place. Meaning, this might not be the original Charizard. One of the reasons why this card sold for so much at the beginning was because there was a lot of buildup around this idea that this was the original Charizard card, and you can actually see that in this article right here. Although the Topsun Charizard card shows a 1995 date on its PSA slab, and by the way, also on the card itself, it was originally distributed in '97 across Japan via packets of gum. If I told you that you were going to get a promo card in something that you eat, like the cereal boxes nowadays, it would be worth nothing. So ironically enough, this is really, really rare, because this is one of those instances where a card that was basically a hand-me-out-for-free kind of card ended up becoming very rare. Now, to the credit of the card itself, this particular card is very rare blueback version and is a error card, which is missing a number in the top left for Pokemon. So, in all fairness, there is a significant amount to this card that justifies it selling for nearly $200,000 and potentially even $500,000. But at the end of the day, the major thing to bear in mind here is that being that it was originally distributed in '97, the Japanese already had their holo base set Charizards printed and distributed across Japan and potentially even in the US, making its way via imports. So in the grand scheme of things, one of the most special things stated about this card, that it was the original Charizard card, doesn't appear to be true, because as we know, a little bit of research allows you to learn that, in fact, it wasn't distributed earlier than the TCG. It was distributed via packs of gum a year after the Japanese already had the TCG. Next up is the documentation and history. Unfortunately, for all the research that I did, this was probably the best and most authoritative source of documentation for this card. That's sad for a variety of reasons, because we know for a fact that there is a lot of hype in Pokemon, especially back around Pokemon Day. There was so much going on that it's borderline painful to think that rumors like, oh, this is the first Charizard card, could still exist in an age when we have so much information so readily available to us. So I'm really happy that something like this has come to light, because this opportunity has presented myself as a YouTuber, but also tons of other content creators, as well as folks like Ludkins, to spread information about these cards so that in the future, when buyers are making more informed decisions, they will be able to consider this information in how much or how little they choose to bid. So when it comes to documentation and history, I do think this is a good learning example for everyone. Learn the card, learn what you're researching, learn everything about it, and then make a decision based off of that. When we say that first edition base set is king, we don't say it because we're pretending to know something. We know for a fact that that is the original English TCG set. There's no debating it. When we look at Gold Star cards, we always say they're in painfully low supply. There's a reason we say that. It's because over time we've seen the numbers, we understand the numbers, and while we don't have the exact specifics of production, we understand the underlying patterns that allow us to make those decisions and land within relative comfort of being very comfortable when we state that. And that's the problem. A lot of people were bidding and looking at this card without considering what was fact versus what was fiction about the legend behind this particular Pokemon card. Finally but not least, I wanted to speak a little bit about depth, and I kind of touched on it when I spoke about artwork. Problem with this card is that it's very, very niche, and oftentimes I celebrate niches because I think that being able to be very specific about what it is you want can be really cool. And here's the truth of the matter. No matter what you say, someone did pay $492,000 for this card. I don't know if it was a good thing, but someone thought it wise enough to spend that much money on a Pokemon card, and that is what that is. So it's pretty cool because at the end of the day, they definitely made a record-breaking sale, and I think that by and far, had they held on to it for the long run, they may have probably even done better. But the problem is that there is a very limited market for cards like this, and the reason for that is primarily because there's not really that many people who want Japanese Topsun promo cards from a pack of gum back in the late 1990s. Most folks in the Pokemon TCG have been bred, have been conditioned, and have been instructed to go after one thing and one thing only, and that is the English TCG. Now, it's not to say folks aren't investing in Japanese, folks aren't investing in other languages, don't get me wrong, there are tons of examples of that happening, but I'm saying at large, some of the record-breaking sales of the past 18 months have come to us via the English TCG. And for the most part, that means a lot of folks are looking that way and not a lot of folks are looking this way. At the end of the day, I think this was an investor or a collector who wanted to buy a card, got the bid run up on him or herself, and then ended up paying what they paid. They then thought maybe we could turn the card around and it would, break even, but unfortunately they got crushed with a pretty wicked loss. So, at the end of the day, although a card like this is staggering in the amount of loss that it suffered, do bear in mind that for other trading cards, as I'd mentioned earlier in this video, you're seeing a retrace, but you're certainly not seeing a drastic crash like this. And I believe the primary reason for that is because there's more people looking for WotC, EX era, sealed, modern, vintage, etc., etc., and not a lot of folks are looking for vintage Japanese promo Topsun cards, and that is a key difference in understanding why this card might have lost the amount of money that it did. Now, the last thing that I wanted to speak about in today's video was actually a little bit of a conspiracy theory that I've drawn up for myself regarding this particular sale. Here's the truth of the matter. Unless you live under a rock, there is a pretty good chance that you know pretty clearly that the Pokemon market is going through what is effectively just a gigantic decline right now. And realistically, I don't think there's any seller who bought in February of 2021 selling 3 months later who didn't expect to either lose a little or at best break even. Now, that is only further exaggerated by the idea that the person who bought this card spent $492,000 on this card. That's not a little bit of money, and that leads me to believe that the person who purchased and then sold this card had to have had a plan behind what they were doing. And so, I theorize that this sale was done with the express purpose of initiating a short-term capital loss. Completely lost about what I'm talking about? Well, here we go. So in the US, and let's just say hypothetically that this buyer and seller, who is one person, is in the US, or at least can be taxed here in the United States based on the fact that they sold out of a PWCC auction lot. Whenever you buy and sell something and make a profit, it's called a capital gain. Whenever you sell it for a loss, it's called a capital loss. When the item was bought and sold within 1 calendar year, it is defined as a short-term capital gain or loss, and if it's over a year, meaning you bought it in 1 year and sold it in the other, then it is defined as a long-term capital gain or loss. For the most part, what you should take away is that long-term capital gains from selling capital assets are usually subject to a tax of 0, 15, or 20%. However, short-term capital gains are taxed as regular income. So depending on your tax bracket, that can be up to 37%. Now, let's just say, for example, that the person who bought this card also does a lot of sports, or also does a lot of any other thing that can be considered a capital gain. What would have ended up happening is, if they had made a equal amount of money, but had inadvertently forced their tax bracket upwards, it could be a situation where they sold this card expressly with the intent of losing money. Reason being, they can still free up some of their original capital that they invested, so $192 comes back to them, and the $300,000 that they lost now gets to offset whatever they have done in the calendar year of 2020 that was profitable. So if they were selling sports cards, and again, mind you, this person spent $500,000 on one card, I have a feeling they have other stuff going on for them. My theory is that they sold it, they knew it was going to be a capital loss, but they have capital gains to offset it on. So now they have some of their money, about 40%, back in their pocket. They can wipe off some of the capital loss, and chances are someone this big is also making moves, and so they can probably take that $192,000 less any applicable fees and taxes and probably turn it into $1 million in a few years. So at the end of the day, this little conspiracy theory of mine not only shows the advantages of understanding the tax code, but also shows that maybe this wasn't as clumsy a decision as it appears to be based on our friends over at Ludkin's very nice title right here. Just a thought, but definitely something that someone who's a little bit more skilled at understanding taxes might have been able to orchestrate in order to help them basically break even in terms of taxes. Now, with all that said, friends, thanks again for checking out another video. You could have been anywhere on the internet, but you chose to spend some time with me, and I appreciate it. Let me know down below, what do you think of this headline? Do you think it was some sort of planned tax strategy in order to help minimize the tax liability, or do you think this is just a sign of a very weak market for Topsun Japanese promo cards? Or hey, maybe a $300,000 loss is a major black swan type of event, and something that the Pokemon hobby should learn from and adapt from shortly thereafter. Either way, let me know what you think down below, and if you're not already, feel free to join the Gengar Gang by hitting the big old subscribe button. As always, friends, thanks again for checking out another video, and we will talk soon. Peace.